Welcome to the complete Overwatch support guides. Before I let you loose, if you want top level, personalised, one-on-one coaching, be sure to check out my rates in my Discord down below, and don't be afraid to shoot me a DM. Anyways, sit back and relax, and I hope you enjoy.
Listen, chat, if you're playing against a Sombra Tracer Winston, you are not looking for nades in the backline. You are not looking to play aggressively, but you're still moving because you're making it harder for them to scout you, harder for them to lock you down, and making it harder for them to actually kill you.
This is the best way to play Ana in Overwatch 2. You as Ana should be generally using your sleep dot defensively and your biotic grenade offensively, looking to move and rotate to positions in the mid-fight to find cheeky angles to toss your nade aggressively and land big purples. However, if you're against a full dive composition, your priority is survival, and you're still moving and rotating in the mid-fight, but to positions of cover and to where your team can help you. Ana's weapon, the Sydney Sleeper, makes Ana shoot out darts dealing 75 damage or healing dealt over time. If Ana zooms in, the shots will be hit scan, and if not, the shots will be a small but fast moving projectile. The rifle has a magazine size of 15, and when scoping in, you also experience a movement speed decrease of 65%. I'll cover some technicalities first. Firstly, scope shots leave a tracer behind, revealing where you last shot from. This just means that you should just have some awareness when scoping in, especially against flankers who you may or may not see. Next, quick scoping. When holding the ADS key, the white outline of Ana's scope appears before you actually zoom in. Be ready for this indication so that you can shoot a few frames later when you just scope in for a split second. But why quickscope? Firstly, as the shot fired is hit scan, you don't need to predict the movement of your teammates. This is especially useful when you're at range and a Genji is double jumping in midair, since it's hard to predict that kind of movements. Quickscoping also minimises the movement penalty and the decreased field of view, since you're not scoping in for a long period of time. Now onto the healing versus damage dynamic, and whether you should be healing or damaging. In short, don't just heal bots. If your Reinhardt is missing 50 HP whilst there's a Pharah aggressing an open space, focus the Pharah. Generally speaking, target priority in general comes down to what's dangerous and what's easy to kill. A pharmacy hovering and firing damage boosted rockets to your team is relatively easy to shoot and can be quite dangerous. Lastly, scoping versus hip firing. In short, scoping in means that shots are easier and faster to land than projectile shots, but the cons are that it's easier to be one-shot due to your reduced movement speed, and the reduced FOV may mean you suffer from tunnel vision. Here's Mineral, the former head coach and general manager of the Boston Uprising, explaining the distance differences when it comes to hip firing or scoping in.
I think around 21 meters is the cutoff, where if the target that you're trying to heal is 21 meters or further away from you, then you're going to heal a lot more by scoping in.
Considering all this, you should avoid staying scoped in for more than 4 to 5 shots unless you're playing in Narnia, which you shouldn't be doing anyways, as you're likely not able to get good angles for your nades. Speaking of which, Ana's first ability, the Purple Goop, makes Ana toss a grenade, dealing 60 damage and 100 healing to enemies and allies respectively. It has a 4 meter radius with a 4-second duration and a 10-second cooldown. The affected allies receive 50% more healing than normal, including from health packs, whereas affected enemies cannot receive any healing at all. Nade is cleansed by Kiriko's Protection Suzu. Before I get onto usage, I thought I'd say that if you want to purchase coaching from yours truly, just join my Discord down below or DM me on Twitter for more details. The main way you'll be getting value out of Ana's nade is by aggressively nading squishies when your team can follow up. This is heavily tied to the positioning section of the guide, but here is me giving an example of when and where you should be looking for these game-changing nades. Imagine if you were here. Look at the nade you could get on backline here. By the way, you had plenty of time to rotate to high ground. You had plenty of time. You could have been walking forward, healing your monkey, healing your monkey, healing your monkey, healing your monkey, rotate up high grounds, nano your Pharah, nade backline, win the fight. Easy clap, clean, right? That's how you win fights as Ana. That's how you win games as Ana. There's also the timing of your nades too. You could land the juiciest, biggest 5-man anti-nade in the entire world, but if your team can't follow up, then it's kind of pointless. Not to mention, it's easier to nade when your team are doing stuff, since not only can they follow up, but it's more likely that your nade will actually hit in the first place.
You have map control and they're rotating. You need to nade this. And this is not a hard nade either. Just right there. You're going to hit Super, you're going to hit Sigma. Probably like a 50-50 chance of forcing Lamp as well. Yeah, you'd force Lamp. Yeah, you'd definitely force Lamp. And now your window of opportunity to nade is gone, because you can no longer safely peek this to nade it. And the value of the nade here is going to be reduced because your team is not going to be in a position to punish it because you do not have your bubbles. Yeah, so you nade this, but it's completely worthless. Like, what else? This Super can literally just hard focus on blocking nade now. And even if you did land it, there's no follow-up. So your timing is completely, like, just trash. So you see how you missed the cycle here too? Look. 3, 2, 1. There's a projected bubble. Where's my nade? This might have actually like gotten a kill. But no, we're not nading this. So because we don't have nade, because we just used it 2 seconds ago.
These two reasons are exactly why you nade when your Reinhardt swings or when your monkey dives in. There's also defensive nades, where you just nade yourself to stay alive, or you nade a teammate for burst healing. Again, this is heavily tied to the positional section. And lastly, something I don't see many honor guides talk about are set nades. These are certain spots where you can throw your nade in the air and have it reliably hit a certain spot every single time by positioning your crosshair in a specific spot. I also recommend checking out Karq's set nade video for more details. On a second ability, the only CC support ability, makes Ana fire a dart, rendering an enemy unconscious for up to 5 seconds, with the sleep dart being on a 14-second cooldown. Sleep dart is one of those abilities you don't often proactively use to get value, since it's a defensive ability. Think of it like Orisa's Fortify. You're not actively looking to get value out of Fortify, you just use it when you're reactively pressured to stay alive, and the same is mostly true with Ana's sleep dart. There is one main exception, and that's just when you don't get pressured at all. If the enemy team have no flankers you need to worry about, tossing a sleep dart and hitting the enemy tank is just free value that you could be missing out on. But do be wary that doing this against teams with high mobility heroes who can dive you can provide a window for them to dive you. Ana's ultimate, Finka's Adrenal Surge, provides a 50% damage buff and damage reduction to any teammate that Ana chooses, lasting 8 seconds, alongside the capability to heal up to 250 HP. Way back in Overwatch 1, ML7, a top 500 Ana streamer, made a Google spreadsheet, link in the description or on the top right, and a video covering what heroes to aggressively nano boost. Obviously, there have been new heroes to Overwatch 2, as well as some reworks, but his sheet still mainly applies. In essence, aggressive nano boost usage enhances a high damage or high mobility, or ideally both traits in a teammate. It's why Nanoblade is such a threat, since it greatly enhances Genji's damage and indirectly enhances his mobility by him being able to get his dash resets more often. But an aggressive teammate who may be a Reinhardt or a Marcher pushing in, a Jungle Queen who's ulted in the backline, a Soldier or a Sojourn taking an angle using their ultimate, or a Zarya aggressively grabbing backline are all good targets for an aggressive nano boost. The other two uses are to revert pressure or to save someone's life, both of which are kind of defensive reasons. Reverting pressure means you nano boost someone who might be losing a duel, like a DPS on an off angle, or a Reinhardt getting run over by the enemy Reinhardt, and all of a sudden, the added HP, damage reduction, and damage boost immediately swings that duel and reverts any and all pressure that was once on them. Imagine you're on Junkertown 3rd point, and your DPS are taking a duel. All of a sudden, your DPS gets chunked down pretty badly, and they get pushed on. Now when you nano boost, you catch the enemy off guard, your DPS now wins that duel, you've just won a vital piece of the map, and now you're a man up, almost guaranteeing you this teamfight win in just a split second. And lastly, nano boosting can save someone's life. For example, sometimes in the Overwatch League, you'll see some Ana players nano boost their Zen or Mercy when they're being pressured in order to keep them alive, and maybe even revert pressure too, since a nano boosted Zen can dish out some pretty good damage. Now into the positioning and playstyle section of this guide. Before I get into the nitty gritty of positioning with not only Ana, but supports in general, here's the Voice Cat giving a broad overlook of how supports play in Overwatch 2.
They have a new passive, which means they can literally take any position on the map, and they're also heavily discouraged from holding the same position for too long. Supports need to be flanking and helping win duels for their DPS. They need to be out-rotating the enemy backline and finding their own angle onto them. Most importantly, they need to help their team draw enemy attention into multiple places.
Positioning can be broken down generally into 4 rules for most heroes, which I'll show as cover, lines of sight, distance from angles, and rotations. But unlike other heroes, all 4 of these rules are extremely important for your own survival as Ana, as well as your ability to find high value through your nades. Here's an example to express this on Lijiang Gardens. Here are all the points on this side of the map with cover, but let's say you're playing this side of Dojo. Here, not only do you have good cover, but you also have line of sight onto points, onto the rest of coast, and into Dojo. Line of sight is important because not only does it mean that you can actually help and heal your team like normal, but it also means that your team can help you if you're in danger. For instance, it could be like a Mercy flying to you, or Brigitte giving you a repair pack. If you're all the way stuck over bridge and you get dove, you have no line of sight, meaning nobody can help you.
You've missed your opportunity to get something done. So what happens? Good sleep. Where should you go after the Winston sleep? I don't know, you tell me. Towards the team, yes. Or If your team can't help you, run away! Nade the floor. It's a 1v1 versus a tracer. You could have drawn this out way longer than you did. You got the health pack at essentially full HP, so that was a waste. Not good.
The third rule is distance from angles or flanks. This just means keeping as much distance as possible from potential flanks or threats so you have time to react, land damage, and run away from these flankers. This example on Dojo means Tracer has to travel a very long distance to get to you, and you also have enough time to react to threats coming to Dojo. And lastly, you also have many rotations to different angles and positions with cover. Both aggressive rotations, where you might want to look for a nade, like through Dojo, or defensive rotations, where you look for health packs, places where you can retreat, or where you can move to your team for help.
I don't like this. Now you've rolled the dice. Do I hit the sleep dart? Oh, I didn't hit the sleep dart? Well, guess what? Look at where I'm at. In no man's land. You don't have nade, the tracer's on you, rotate to another position, better sight line. She's on you again, you grab the health back, you rotate again. And then by then, maybe you have your nade, and then if you're doing your job elsewhere, and maybe that tracer's used to recall, then you go kill her. You push and you pull. You rotate left and right to create more offensive opportunities, but also to make it easier for you to survive. You are static. Now, in Overwatch 1, that was bad, but it was doable. But now there's one fewer playmaker, so if you're a deadweight lead sock nobody, then it's a lot harder to keep you alive, and standing still doesn't work. And listen, chat, if you're playing against a Sombra Tracer Winston, you are not looking for nades in the backline. You are not looking to play aggressively, but you're still moving because you're making it harder for them to scout you, harder for them to lock you down, and making it harder for them to actually kill you.
When you go for aggressive rotations, refer back to the thing about nade timing. You want to go for these rotations when your team are doing stuff, because nobody's looking at you, they're looking at the tanks drawing attention. That entire section might be a lot to digest, so let me simply summarize it in 6 words. Aggressively or defensively move with cover. Staying static, regardless of what composition you're playing against, is a death sentence for you in Overwatch 2. If you're playing against more static, immobile compositions, look to move to aggressive positions where you can fish for big anti-nades, and maybe even sleep darts too. If you're playing against more mobile, diving compositions, look to move to more defensive positions with cover and or where your team can see you to help out, using your sleep and nade defensively. I know I only went over one example in high detail, but hopefully the principle of teaching a man how to fish for life, rather than giving a man a fish for a day, carries across here. Now onto Ana's backline synergies. Ana Kiriko, a high utility, versatile support duo. Kiriko makes up for Ana's lack of mobility, and the greatest downside of this pairing is that it's a bit of a jack of all trades but master of none kind of thing. It lacks the brawl capability of Ana Brig, it lacks any speed compared to Moira Lucio, and it lacks the double hit scan effect of Ana Bap. But for most situations, you shouldn't really complain about this pairing. Ana Moira. Ana makes up for Moira's lack of utility, and actually, in the higher ranks, because Moira's in top 500 mainly play as flankers, you'll be hogging up most of the healing. Nothing too much to say here aside from Moira lacks any ability to peel for you, and if you're Moira heal bots, you have to be going for aggressive anti-nades. Ana Lucio. This pair optimizes Ana for brawl comps due to Lucio's speed. Don't tunnel onto your brawl tank heal botting them, still look for gaps and areas to find value off your nades, and Lucio's speed can be also useful to you to help you rotate more aggressively or defensively as talked about just now. Ana Mercy. A good Mercy will mainly be pocketing the DPS. I'm sure you all know about the Surge and Mercy crisis going on right now. This relieves the burden of healing off you to just your tank and your ability to once again fish for those nades. If you are playing defensively for whatever reason, like you're up against a hard dive comp, stay in LOS of your Mercy and keep your distance from those flankers. Cover is really important here. Ana Zen, the classic glass cannon duo. High utility, high damage, strong ultimates, and relatively high though inconsistent healing. This is best suited for longer ranged maps, though at that point, Bap Zen or Mercy Zen, hence why you need to make up for it in the value you get with nades. Ana Bap, just play this duo against Pharmacy. In higher ranks at least, Bap Ana is pulled out when your team is really struggling with Pharmacy and your Bap acts as a third DPS. In fact, the Spitfire way back in 2021 pulled this out against the Paris Eternal to deal with Pharmacy specifically. The issue with Bap Ana is that it struggles against dive though, so be wary of that. And lastly, Ana Brig. It's unfortunate that Brig lost her stun in Overwatch 1, which made this duo quite powerful, but Brig can still do a solid job poppy guarding and peeling for you. Make sure you guys rotate together and maintain LOS, and let Brig pack her DPS whilst you do the rest. Well, that's it for the guide. This is the best way to play Baptiste. Baptiste obviously has his high utility in Immortality field, but make sure you're getting use out of your gun damage too. Don't just heal bot, look for different angles to take and rotate to in the mid-fight with the help of your Exo Boots and Amplification Matrix to take the fight in your own hands and become a third DPS. Also, don't waste your regen burst and toss your lamp around corners when your team are about to die. Bap's gun, Demoman Sticky Bomb Launcher, makes Bap shoot a 3-round burst dealing 25 damage per round. Alternatively, he can fire healing nades, dealing 50 splash healing or 70 direct healing with a fire rate of 0.9 seconds and an ammo capacity of 13. The reload time is 1.5 seconds. The most important part of your gun is to interweave the healing and damage. Too many Baps either just heal bot completely or just solely deal damage whilst their team is low. The general rhythm is to shoot twice, then heal, but you can also shoot heal if that's more comfortable or if that allows you to land your healing more accurately. Here's Paulo explaining when and how to do the min-maxing.
The one thing that we look at with our Baptiste at a GM level that's worth mentioning is the damage to healing ratio, right? Damage to healing. Min-maxing every single little bit of spam that we can possibly get out. When we see a Baptiste review and I see you heal botting, there's no excuse for that. Like, there's absolutely no excuse for that. Whether it's shooting Rhine Shield, whether it's pressuring a Diva on an off angle, whether it's putting a little bit of pressure on a Lucio that's wall riding, I don't give a rip. But there has to be constant pressure put out at all points of time. Now, the key thing with BAP is knowing who to shoot and when to shoot. Because when you have a safe opportunity, that's when your opportunity to shoot is, right? When you don't have a safe opportunity or you have to walk into sniper LOS, if there's a Hanzo pressuring you, whatever, then that's where the pressure is not quite as necessary. Like right now, this is a perfect example of when you would not peak. This is when you do not put damage pressure out because your team isn't taking space and there's a risk of you getting one shot here or taking unnecessary damage. However, as you round the corner, that's when our shoot, heal, that's where the rhythm starts to kick in.
However, we can go a step further with your target priority and who you should be damaging. Generally speaking, your target priority comes down to who's the easiest to kill and who's the most dangerous person on the enemy team. Therefore, shooting an aggressive Tracer in the backline, or a frontlining Reaper walking forwards, or an enemy support in open space, take priority over autopiloting and shooting the enemy tank.
Again, we talked about it, like what's the easiest damage output? Well, it's just shoot Reinhardt shield. But right now, what would be the most important thing to shoot? Even if it's not quite as easy. Do you see?
Reaper.
Right, exactly, the Reaper. This guy, I mean, he looks kind of funny with the hat, but yeah, this guy, right? So this guy needs healing. That's number one priority. She's too low. But then if you're going to weave your heal then damage, the heal then damage needs to be on the Reaper and not on the Reinhardt.
Yes.
You keep shooting Reinhardt, and then you're still shooting Reinhardt.
Oh my god. Okay.
You see what I'm saying? So this is where we talk. This is what we call the hypnosis, where you're like so locked in and breaking this Rhine shield that you're missing the Mercy and Bap, who are actually really killable right now.
Next, you can fire your heal nades into the air before a team fight occurs to increase your healing output by double, or to deal damage whilst your nades fall from the sky. You'll do this stuff on defense at the beginning of a round. Think Blizzard World first point defense. Bap's first ability, secretly the most annoying ability to play against, makes Bap activate a burst of healing in a 10 meter radius, dealing either 100 or 50 burst healing, depending on whether you're below or above 50% HP. It also deals 50 healing over 5 seconds no matter what. The cooldown is a lengthy 15 seconds. The biggest mistake players make with their regen burst is that they don't actually hit their teammates. Guys, 10 meters is a short ass radius. It doesn't have the range of Briggs and Spire, and considering it's on a lengthy cooldown, you just can't be wasting the cooldown because you are 5 meters out of range. With that being said, once you activate Regen Burst and allies receive it within the radius, they can go as far out of range as they want and still receive the healing. But if they're out of range or out of line of sight initially, then they move into range or line of sight, they still won't receive the healing. In terms of usage, Regen Burst is pretty easy to use, but it's also pretty easy to misuse. Regen Burst should be used when either you or a nearby teammate are under pressure and they need the extra burst healing. Conversely, Regen Burst shouldn't be randomly used for general additional healing, since if you do this, when your tank or teammate actually need the extra burst of healing under pressure, your Regen Burst will be busy on cooldown. Obviously, again, make sure your team are actually within the 10 meter range to catch your Regen Burst. And lastly, try not to stack your Regen Burst on top of your lamp since it's kind of inefficient. Just use your lamp first, then Regen Burst after, or vice versa. Bap's second ability, Sumito's Arch Nemesis, makes Bap throw out a disc device that emits an immortality field for 5 seconds, where allies cannot drop below 10% of their HP. The device itself has 150 HP, and has a lengthy cooldown of 25 seconds. The most basic thing with your lamp is just to toss it around corners, so it lasts. The reason why corner lamps are much more effective is that it forces the enemy team to turn the corner out into open space just to get rid of the lamp. But generally speaking, how and when do you lamp? Well, I see two main factors: lamping based off HP and lamping based off aggression, both of which are intertwined. Obviously, if a teammate is on critical HP, then they're likely taking a lot of aggression, but I think aggression should be the main factor as to whether you lamp or not, and ignoring this is likely why you lamp too late or just when a teammate dies. If a teammate is full HP, but a Nano Blader Genji has just dashed into them, you should probably be lamping immediately. If your Reinhardt is full HP, but is getting walked over by a nano boosted Ramattra with speed boost, he's gonna need that lamp because of the aggression that he's gonna be taking. So if you misuse your lamp, it's likely because you used it when there was no aggression at all, or you were just too slow to recognize that aggression. Bap's passive, the Jumpy Boys, makes Bap charge his exo boots when he crouches to provide enough force for him to jump in the air up to 9 meters. There's no super big brain use to this other than trying to attain high ground, which I'll briefly touch on in the positioning section, or to avoid ultimates like Shatter. Just make sure you don't become one of those pogo jumping Baps who get their head dinked on by a Widowmaker. Bap's ultimates, the Goalkeeper, makes Bap create a matrix that amplifies healing and damage by 100%, lasting 10 seconds. The orientation can be changed by pressing the ultimate button again. There's two main matrices I see. The first is to zone and take space, and the second is for selfish, independent damage. Let's talk about the first matrix. Here, you generally matrix on corners out into open space, and then your team pushes forward and or onto high grounds.
But if Oni got high noons, that forces enemy team to back up. That forces these guys to back up. It forces these guys to sort of back up in essence, right? So there's less pressure on Dans, which then means, guess what? Hey, there's less pressure on Dans? Okay, cool. As, Diva, Lucio, Bap, even May to some extent, you don't need to be stacked on the Ryan right now. You can do something else. And what's it something you can do? You know that the enemy team is abusing these high grounds, right? Like this high ground over here, this high ground over here. You can send a little kill squad to go push that. You'll see the Diva, you'll see the Lucio, and the Bap all together as a little high ground, little kill squad. They're ready to fight, right? And they'll push that high ground and they'll catch a Valentine there who's trying to go for an off angle. You can use ultimates like McCree ult or even Square to force pressure off your Reinhardt and then have your little kill squad go pressure people on the sides.
Here's also another example on Blizzard World 2nd, where you matrix the high ground to deter the enemy team from staying there. And then there's the second type of matrices, which are more selfish and focus on you dishing out your own damage from a different angle.
And an individual window, which is something that I really, really want you to practice more and just try it. Like when I was working with Aris before he went to Atlanta, right? It's something we talked about a lot. Like he was when I told him I want you to just a window whenever you see an option. Like he first was like, huh? And then he started trying it and he literally would just pop off. He would literally window and get a pick every single time. And then you can use window mid fight as literally a pop off thing. Hell, you could take more aggressive corners. You can rotate over here, window, and just kill people. This may be when they're kiting away or something.
In Overwatch 2, where the map is often more open and you just can't heal bot as much, individual or selfish windows are super important to find in the mid fight, which leads me nicely onto the positioning section of the guides. For those who've watched my guides, you'll know that for most heroes, there's 4 general rules of positioning: cover, lines of sight, distance from angles, and rotations. But Bap is special in that, unlike heroes like Ana or Zen, Bap has vertical mobility, which is important for rotations. I'll use King's Road Third Point to illustrate these 4 rules. Firstly, here you have cover. Cover is super important because it allows you to stop taking damage at any second, and it prevents you from wasting cooldowns out in the open.
This is a good position here, right? Or this is a good position here. You really need to be considering cover, right? There's a chance of sleep dart, there's a chance of nade, there's a chance of the knife, there's a chance of Hanzo damage. There's all sorts of things that could happen from this position. And this actually doesn't make it easier for you to do damage. By moving like this and positioning this far from cover, it makes it harder. Even here, why would you do that here and not from here, right? Or do it from here, right? Same exact angle, right?
Secondly, you have line of sight, meaning you can see the entire battlefield. As a general rule, the further back you are, the more you can see and the wider your FOV is. If you're bunched up right next to your tank, you'd be able to see fuck all around you, like whether there's a duel going on right by the mega, or whether your DPS need healing from high ground, etc. This leads me into the third rule of distance from angles. This just means you have enough distance to react to enemy flankers, like here on King Zo. You have enough distance if a Tracer decided to flank by Mega. And lastly, rotations. This just means being able to move to more aggressive positions, like on high ground, which ties back into your exo boots. Note how this position also gives you cover, line of sight, and a great angle for a selfish or independent matrix to carry the fight, as talked about in the last section. Then, you can look to rotate to the other piece of high ground when the enemy team are coming back from spawn. Just make sure you do these rotations in the mid-fight, when your tanks are drawing attention, so you don't get caught out moving in open space. Now onto Bap's backline synergies. Bap Kiriko. Of course, there's a classic double immortality, but what's more interesting in my opinion is that you really have all your bases covered with this duo. Kiriko can cleanse antis, you both have enough sustain, mobility and damage, and just like with Ana Kiriko, you shouldn't be complaining if you get this duo on your team, though some swaps to Lucio or Mercy may fit some compositions better. Bat Brig. This is built for peel and AoE healing. Whilst this combo isn't as strong as it once used to be, and there are better alternatives who offer different utility, if you want damage and sustain, this is likely your go-to. Bap Zen. This is the most alike to a glass cannon, with a high amount of range and poke damage, hence why you should be playing this on maps like Havana, Soko Royale and Junkertown, all of which have long, narrow sightlines. If you plan on playing this combo on other maps or against Dive for whatever reason, make sure both of you rotate as one, that you keep as much distance as possible, and that you're surrounded by cover. Bap Lucio. This duo is heavily optimised for brawl comps, as the London Spitfire showed in the last season of Pro League. Try not to run any DPS that might want to play completely separately from your core, since there isn't much ranged healing here. Keep good LOS on your team, and interweave that healing and damage when your Reinhardt is feeling the heat. Bap Mercy. This is like when you're playing Mercy Zen, but you're getting rolled on Zen, so you decide to go to Kiriko, Bap, or Brig. Your Mercy will take care of your DPS, giving you time to deal your own DPS. Nothing too special about this duo here. Bap Moira. This support duo has the most raw area of effect healing in the entire game, but that's not what you're playing this for. Moira's in top 500, funnily enough, actually lean into the DPS playstyle, and you can too, since you also have enough sustain. Both Moira and Baptiste can dish out their fair share of damage by taking aggressive positions thanks to their sustain. Bap Ana. Just run this if you're struggling against Pharmacy, and don't run this against Dive. Well, that's it for the video. This is the best way to play Brigitte in Overwatch 2. Thanks to Brig's newly founded burst healing and her repair packs, Brig is now the ultimate peel or protection support. But not just for her other support, but for her DPS too. Look to position yourself on off angles, not only to help your DPS, but to also threaten the angle yourself thanks to your bash and whip shots. Pack squishies, play cover, and look to brawl in the mid fights. Brig's weapon, the worst support primary, makes Brigitte swing her flail, dealing 35 damage in a 6 meter radius. There honestly isn't much to your regular flail. You could use it to trigger Inspire up close, then to bash out immediately after, but most of the time, you could just achieve the same thing with your whip shots. You can also turn your camera to hit multiple enemies at once, but that's about it. Brig's first ability, the Whip Nene, makes Brigitte throw her flail a distance of 20 meters, dealing 70 damage with a cooldown of 4 seconds. There's 3 main uses to Brig's whip shots, which I'll use under the acronym IDK, just like the rapper. This stands for Inspire, Damage, and Knockback. First off, the Inspire. Simply put, flail large hitboxes and tanks who off-angle or push aggressively. For example, flail a Sigma when his shield drops, flail a Reinhardt when he uses Fire Strike, flail a Zarya after she bubbles, and flail as soon as the enemy Wrecking Ball reaches the apex of his pile driver. Next up, damage. I'm sure you guys know of the old one-shot combo, which used to be bash, flail then whip shots, which does 155 damage. However, there's a bug with Brig's shield to where you can cancel it immediately with your whip shots, meaning the new combo is to flail first, then bash and whip shot, meaning you can essentially one-shot a Tracer if she's right up next to you. There's also whip-shotting to finish off a target, or for general pressure. With this, I will say that you should definitely be looking to land your whip shots on a Tracer if possible. You immediately half her HP with a 4-second cooldown, meaning you'll likely force a recall if she's not getting healed. 70 damage to a Tracer who only has 150 HP is a lot more meaningful than 70 damage to a Wrecking Ball who could have over 1000 HP. And last but not least, you can whip shot for knockback. There's the environmental kills you can net with this, but the knockback is more so for peeling purposes. For example, whip-shotting a Winston jumping at you so you force his bubble early, whip-shotting a ball using his pole driver so he misses, whip-shotting a Tracer so she can't track as easily, etc. There's actually an additional use of whip-shot which is actually just not whip-shotting. This is because the knockback you deal might actually end up booping a target to safety, though I will say that scenarios where you actually whip-shot a teammate to safety and thus cause a lost teamfight are few and far between. Brig's second ability, the Pack Patch, makes Brigitte throw a ranged healing pack that heals an ally for 100 healing over 2 seconds, as well as immediately giving them 25 HP. You have 3 charges with a 6-second cooldown per charge and a maximum range of 30 meters. The fundamental use of Repair Pack is to time it on your DPS for when they're aggressing, particularly when they're taking duels.
Please pack Dove. Your priorities are still not packing Dove. He's getting his wings clipped and you've done absolutely nothing. Look at you, look at you. You're playing Ring Around the Rosie. This is absolute agony. He's gonna die. He's got his recall forced and it's your fault. I'm not saying don't pack tanks. Just prioritize your DPS. Oh my gosh, does Dynasty just die in front of you? Dynasty just dies in front of you, doesn't he? Oh my gosh. He just dies. Like, I don't know if he would have been able to change that or not, but you could have tried. But Dove got his recall forced and he's been able to have to be, MIA. Your Echo's lost a duel. All of these things that you could have helped with.
The secondary use, which is also linked into that, is for the burst heal and peel. Because of the new 25 burst healing, you can stack these repair packs on top of each other to make one of your teammates essentially unkillable. Look at this example on New Queen Street against a top 500 Board Tracer dive. Meta 1 on the Brig just gives his Zen 2 packs, and he's basically unkillable. This doesn't just apply to Zen of course, but to also any other squishy teammate who's feeling the heat. A last note before moving on, please don't waste your repair packs. If you waste them, you won't actually have them for when you need them, and this can easily cause a lost teamfight. Brig's third ability, the worst shield in the game, gives Brig a 300 HP barrier that gets put on a 5-second cooldown when it gets destroyed. I'll also couple in her bash too, since it saves me from editing another ding noise. Her bash makes Brig charge forward 12 meters, dealing 50 damage on a 5-second cooldown. Brig's shield is just often viewed as a medium to use her bash, but good use of Brig's shield can be a lifesaver. Your shield will mainly be used to make rotations safely and or to survive or threaten a duel. As a result, you'll need to learn out the shield dance, which isn't too difficult. Just weave in your shield with your swings, allowing your armor and inspire to relieve the pressure off your shield. If you're dueling a soldier on an off angle for example, you'll want to save your shield in anticipation for his helix rockets because of its burst damage. However, you can regularly weave in your shield with its normal primary fire, since it's small increments of damage that your armor and inspire can slowly heal up. Holding Brig's shield also puts you in third person, which can be useful for scouting before a fight begins.
What if you shielded around this corner and peeked and pinged people? Right here, you turn this corner, screw the tracer.
Yeah.
Like you would be like on a torb here. Okay, that affects my decision. Maybe I'm gonna swing wide with the DPS here. Like you're gonna provide information to your team.
Now onto Brig's bash. Holy Shift Kid covered this in his guide, but likewise to your whip shots, there's 3 uses of your bash. For mobility, damage, and inspire. In terms of mobility, you'll be using bash to escape danger, especially on off angles. I'll have a clip of Sparrow referring to this example in Rialto later on, but say you're holding either of these angles with your DPS. If there's too much pressure, you can simply bash out for mobility to escape these scenarios. In terms of damage, you'll be using bash to finish off an enemy or to quickly burst one down. For example, again on Rialto, if you're holding this high ground on first point defense and a Genji, Hanzo, Ashe, or any squishy comes up to contest the high grounds, you can bash aggressively to put pressure on these squishies, which should force them off the high grounds. Or at the very least, you'll force them to get healing. The combo talked about earlier can also come into play here as well. Holy Shift Kid advises using bash as a finisher in these scenarios, since if you use it too early, you might not have it if you need to escape, which is a fair point. Lastly, touching on your inspire. Using bash for inspire is pretty niche and really comes by proxy of using your bash for damage as touched on prior. Speaking of your inspire, Brig's passive, Inspiration, makes Brig deal 15 healing per second for 5 seconds in a 20 meter radius. Even though your inspire is passive, you can look to proactively proc it, and it's simpler than you might think, as ex-contenders coach Sword explains here.
You gotta walk up. That is the big thing people don't understand. Yes, one of your major goals is to keep Zen alive in dive. But your other major goal is, I need to proc inspire so my team doesn't die. You need to know when you need to brawl. And this is when point number 2 comes in. Can I take space? If flank's clear, you can probably look to start taking... You don't have to worry about the Zen, so you could potentially take space, but there's one other factor that you need to keep in mind when I can take space. Is my front line applying pressure? Is him, maybe him? Are they applying pressure to where I can walk up and take space? Yes? Well, walk up, man up, walk up. You have nothing to fear. No one's looking at you. You take the space. You go to the closest terrain so that you can go melee things, right?
Here's a visual example of the mistake Sword is describing. Here, the Brig is practically glued to the Zen in the backline, even though she could be getting value on the high ground. Not just for the reason of proccing Inspire, but to also physically control this area of the map. Obviously, you can't just walk up and leave your Zen, hence the solution is to walk up together. I'll explain this a bit more in the penultimate section of the guides. Brigitte's ultimate, Who Cares, is getting a rework, makes Brigitte provide 15 overhealth every half second and up to 100 overhealth on yourself and allies. It lasts 10 seconds and gives you a 30% speed buff. Since Brig's Rally is getting reworked in Season 4, I'm not going to go too in depth on its usage. In short, Rally should be used to either take or hold space. For example, on Junkertown third point attack, if you want to take high ground, Rally can help you do so. And if you're defending this high ground on Junkertown third, using Rally can help you hold the high ground or to retake it if you've already lost it. Now onto the most interesting part of the guides, Brig's positioning, playstyle and communication. There are 4 key general guidelines, as coined by Nata OW, which I'll showcase on Havana second point attack for your overall positioning. Firstly, have cover or a corner, super important in order to save your HP. Secondly, have line of sight onto the enemy team and onto yours too. Thirdly, have good distance from angles in order to whip shot any flankers early on before they get on top of you. And lastly, have defensive and aggressive rotation options in order to rotate back to safety or to push up and support your DPS aggressing on either angle. Speaking of supporting your DPS, I covered this with regards to your repair pack, but you yourself can also physically take and threaten these angles as I've touched on before.
In a close range 1-on-1, I can threaten things like a McCree. I can threaten things like a Diva. I can threaten things like an Ana. If the Echo gets too close, and the key thing is you don't have to beat them to control the space. In other words, you don't have to like actually win the McCree 1v1 versus a Brig. It's not a great matchup for you, but you can whip shot them away. You can say, hi, this spot's mine. Not necessarily because I can beat you in the 1v1, but because I can get rid of you.
The real problem here is, once again, now I don't know if you could have gotten here, right? It's this. You could have walked backwards, senior soldier coming from spawn, going high ground, and then take this position with him. Or this, right? You could have walked forward with this, pocketed your sojourn, procced a whip shot on this, done the exact same thing, but done it from a position where you could actually pocket the soft angle. Shockingly, soldier drops. I wonder why.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, look at that, look at that. Shockingly, sojourn is gonna die. Well, okay, that's a little bit idiotic from her, right? But like, one pack and this doesn't happen. This is something that we were leveraging even in Overwatch League more with the Brig metas, where it was like you could position with your DPS and just be able to bash away to a different position if you got flustered.
Yeah.
And just to hammer this home even more, I'll give more examples. There's the one on Rialto first point defense, where you control the high ground either by yourself or with another teammate. On Dorado first point attack, you can control the shop, or on Dorado third point attack, you can push and control the high ground, ideally with another DPS. There's even more nuance to this though, since this aggressive playstyle of holding and threatening angles with the DPS can change depending on your backline, specifically if you're playing Brig Zen. Here's Coach Spike explaining how you can balance the peel side of Brig, whilst also getting value brawling up close.
Bigger problem for yourself by playing ranged is peeling. It's very hard for the heroes who should peel for you to be an active member in the fight, while also being able to peel for you if you are far away. This creates a very awkward moment for heroes like Diva or Brig, for example. They want to go in as well and fight and follow up on engages and brawl. But if they push up, they leave you alone, which makes you incredibly vulnerable to flankers. If they don't push up, they can help you with threats, but they're completely useless for the fight itself. If you play closer, they can deal damage, but still have the opportunity to quickly turn around and help.
And lastly, I'll end off with communication. Especially in Brig Zen, communicating when you're moving is super important in order to stay on the same page with your team. Take this example on Ilios. Here, our Brig Zen backline are aggressively rotating, whilst our dive crew, being our Sombra and Ball, are busy setting up their dive. As a result, our backline get completely shredded because we're basically taking a 3v5 here as our Ball and Sombra aren't ready yet. A quick fix to this, as Brig, is to simply say, we're ready to rotate, and this will prompt your dive crew to say, we're ready to dive, or maybe they'll say, wait, now we're ready, and then you can rotate and dive as one. This makes the rotation much easier and safer. Your tank player can also be calling the dive too, not just the Brig. Lastly, a quick and brief overview of Brig's backline synergies. Brig Kiriko. You're both self-sufficient, with Kiriko being able to utilize off angles in a similar vein to you, but Kiriko can also heal your tank too. Your ability to control off angles should be high, and coupled with Kiriko's utility in Kitsune Rush, Teleport, and Suzu, you shouldn't really be complaining about this duo too much. Brig Moira. This is, on paper, the best backline to go against dive comps, as both Brig and Moira are the most self-sufficient supports in the game. Nothing really changes about your playstyle here, just look to support DPS and off angles where necessary. Brig Bap. A high sustain combo that doesn't try to compromise on utility, damage, or range too much. You may need to worry about nades, or your DPS getting out damaged by a Mercy Pocket, hence being within brawl range is important, and your BAP has to be utilising the damage aspect of his kit. Brig Mercy. This is what happens when you get 2 main supports or 2 Mercy OTPs on your team. Whilst you may be able to control off angles and aid your DPS well, thanks to damage boost and repair packs, you're missing out on the utility and damage a Brig Bap or a Brig Zen could bring. Brig Honor. A versatile duo for Brig that gives you a lot of freedom on the hero. Your Honor can take care of healing your tank, but you may also want or need to support your Honor if she gets dove and or if she looks to flank and get a cheeky nades. Play it as you would, looking to control those off angles around the fight, supporting your DPS whilst doing so. Brig Lucio, the classic combo that helped cause 2 months of PTSD in the Overwatch League. Obviously this works best with short range brawl comps, and ensure you use your packs with purpose. Look to utilise corners and hard cover to regenerate your packs as well as your own HP. Brig Zen, the duo with the greatest potential but can also greatly flop. This will certainly test your awareness on Brig looking out for flankers as well as your packer management. In essence, saving enough packs to burst heal Zen, but also balancing that out with healing your tank. Well, that's it for the video. Kiriko's primary fire, her Healy Papers, make Kiriko fire some healing talisman that seek targeted allies, dealing 13 healing per talisman with a maximum 35 meter lock-on range. The yellow talisman show that your healing has been locked on, whereas the blue talisman do not. However, the blue talisman can still heal. Contrary to some other guides, Kiriko can dish out a significant amount of healing, dealing 79 healing per second, although the projectile speed can reduce this, which leads me on to my first piece of advice, which is to maintain short to medium sightlines. This means that your healing of Fuda will get to your ally faster due to a reduced time to travel, and it reduces the chance that your healing of Fuda will miss and get blocked by your ally simply turning around a corner. Also, try and focus on single target healing rather than spreading your healing across multiple teammates. The reason for this is because you could be missing your healing of Fuda when trying to flick your healing between teammates, and for you to stop healing and to heal someone else just takes too long. A key thing to mention before moving on is to ensure that you interweave your kunai and your talisman like Baptiste's gun, so you might fire a full set of talisman, shoot your kunai once or twice, then continue the cycle. Note that you can also animation cancel your melee with your kunai. Speaking of which, Kiriko's secondary fire, Azami's kunai, makes Kiriko throw kunai dealing 40 damage to the body and 120 to the head. They travel at 70 meters per second with a fire rate of 1 kunai for almost every half second. For reference, Zen's orbs travel at 90 meters per second, and by just doing some math, Kiriko's DPS from just body shots alone is 72.7. In comparison, Zenyatta's DPS is 120 from just body shots, no discord. Likewise to your healing of Fuda, maintain short to medium sightlines. Your kunai have a relatively slow projectile speed, hence landing them from afar is going to be more inconsistent than landing them up close. Another piece of advice is to try and find narrow, tight angles to where you can spam your kunai aiming at head level in order to maximize your chances of landing headshots, and who knows, you might even get a pick. The best advice for your kunai is target priority. The 2 general rules for target priority are to shoot what's easy and or what's dangerous. You don't want to be shooting 40 damage kunais into shields, but instead, you want to be landing 120 kunais on squishies and tanks. I'll mention this example later, but say you're on King Zod 3rd point attack, instead of stacking main shooting shield, you could use either of the high grounds, using any of your mobility to at least shoot behind the enemy Reinhardt, or preferably, shooting any unaware squishies. Just imagine 2-tapping an unaware sniper like a Widowmaker or an Ana, who are easy targets, or a Sojourn walking in a straight line, fishing for a railgun one-shot, both an easy and dangerous targets. Kiriko's first ability, Moira Fade but better, makes Kiriko teleport directly to an ally, even through walls, with a max range of 35 meters alongside a cooldown of 7 seconds. Note that Swift Step has a brief cast time that can be interrupted and can cleanse most negative effects. Also note that, thanks to CarQ, you can use the stock sensitivity of your Swift Step to help guide your healing of Fuda.
This indicator reference tip only works on the default swift step sensitivity of 50. If you put it any higher, let's say 100 for example, it will not be an accurate representation of whether the Ofuda will seek or not.
You can increase the sensitivity of your swift step to be able to flick to an ally to escape easier, but this will come at the cost of your Fuda accuracy. There are two main uses to swift step, aggressive and defensive. Let's go through defensive first. What seems to be a unanimous stance amongst most coaches and guides out there is to initially take an aggressive position or angle as Kiriko, then use your teleport defensively to escape danger, as IOStocks described it, an oh shit button. Here's Sparlow describing an example of ML7 who could have done this on Kiriko.
Like, look at the Pharah, look at the Zarya, and look at the Genji. They're all looking at him right now. Imagine all of this resource being devoted into a Kiriko, who then just TPs out, and then your team walks forward. And you just press shift, a 7-second cooldown, and then that's it. Do you see this? Do you see this, chat? Do you see this? This is what I was talking about. Okay, he kind of trolls the lobby with how he does it, and he also doesn't have his E, so I'm like not a huge fan. But do you see how like theoretically here, he could shoot, bait attention, then TP out, and like bait a lot of attention. His execution and timing there, I think was a goof up, but like there's theory in there.
As IOStocks brings up in his guide, unlike Moira Fade, you have to do a 180-degree turn to teleport to a teammate on Kiriko. So getting comfortable and ready to do your flicks to quickly escape danger will be vital for staying alive. You can also utilize the invulnerability frames of your swift step to avoid things like Sombra's EMP. For example, on Route 66, say a Sombra tries to EMP you and your Zen. If you anticipate the EMP, you could swift step to your Zen, avoiding the EMP entirely, and then use your protection Suzu on your Zen to save his life afterwards. However, I want to take this idea a step further, leading me onto aggressive swift steps. While some guys out there have advised against using swift step aggressively, there needs to be more nuance and development of this idea. Of course, teleporting to your Genji whilst he's deep in the enemy backline, or teleporting straight to your tank whilst they're on critical HP is not a good idea. However, teleporting to a healthy DPS who's taking an aggressive position in order to dish out damage yourself or to help support your DPS seems more appropriate. Referring back to the King Zod third point attack example, this would be teleporting to a Sombra or Genji playing on high grounds. The last use of teleport I'll go through is for scouting purposes. So for example, on Lijiang Tower Night Market, you could wall climb on the high ground to scout where the enemy team is coming from and then teleport straight out to your team. Kiriko's second ability, the R6 Impact Grenade, makes Kiriko throw a Suzu that deals 50 healing, makes allies invulnerable for 1 second, as well as cleansing the majority of negative effects in the game, like Biotic Nade, Hack, etc. It is also on a 14-second cooldown. There are two main uses of Kiriko's Protection Suzu, to use it selfishly or to use it selflessly. Since using it more selfishly is more simple to explain, let's start off with that. Selfish Suzus are most commonly used when you yourself are in danger, likely from taking an aggressive position. For example, if you and Genji are dueling another Genji and you happen to be low HP, you might want to Suzu yourself to prevent death. You could also TP out of there, but you could be losing that angle and leaving your Genji out in the dry. The selfless Suzus are a bit more complicated. As a general rule of thumb, look for teammates who are aggressive and are likely to be pressured and get ready to Suzu them if need be. Refer back to the Sombra Zen example I gave in the last section. More simple examples could be using your Suzu on a Reinhardt who just got antied whilst you're busy on an angle shooting at the enemy team, or it could be using your Suzu on a friendly Tracer taking a duel and she got hacked by the enemy Sombra, in which case you can just teleport over to her, Suzu your Tracer and fend off the enemy Sombra. This refers back to my stance on aggressive teleports, where in this example, you're aggressively teleporting over to your Tracer, but it's unlikely that you or her are in any great danger. Kiriko is therefore almost akin to a support Tracer, in that she can instantaneously relieve pressure anywhere on the map using a teleport and protection Suzu to immediately swing a duel in favour of her team. There is simply no other support in the game who has the flexibility to do this, which is why, unlike some other guys have stated, you can play Kiriko in split compositions, but I'll get onto that in the last section of the guides. Kiriko's ultimate, Mini Hanamura, makes Kiriko summon a Fox Spirit that rushes forward, accelerating move speed by 50%, rate of fire by 50%, reload time for 50%, cooldown reduction by 60%, all lasting 10.5 seconds with a 25 meter max range. There is also a 1.5 second lingering effect if you step outside of Kiriko's Kitsune Rush. To my eyes, there seem to be two main uses, to either run it down main or to win a flank. Running it down main is the simpler and more obvious choice. your movement becomes incredibly elusive, your DPS is drastically increased thanks to the fire rate, reload, and cooldown reduction, and the speed boost ensures that the enemy team will certainly have a tough time running away from your Kitsune Rush. Just imagine this ultimate on a map like Colosseo with a very long midsection, and it's basically a guaranteed teamfight win as long as you time your Kitsune Rush with your team's aggression. An additional but key tip to this use of Kitsune Rush is to try and use it when the enemy team are in open space. The reason for this is because enemies cannot run away from your Kitsune Rush as easily if they're in open space compared to them being around a corner. So for example, this Kitsune Rush on Lijiang Night Market is good because the enemy team are in open space and therefore have to move some notable amount of distance to get to safety. Obviously, make sure you time this Kitsune Rush with your team's aggression in order to capitalize on this misplay by the enemy team. If you just pop Kitsune Rush by yourself and walking forward, you're gonna feed. The other use of Kitsune Rush, in that of winning a flank, seems to be quite understated, but frankly, I could see this being used in very split compositions to win key areas and flanks in the map. Think Route 66 third point attack by the Loi. Whilst you could argue that this isn't an optimal use of Kitsune Rush, you're much more likely to win the teamfight if you win this section of the map. Now onto the final section, being playstyle, positioning, and composition. Now this is where it gets complex, so to help simplify the concepts down a bit, I have cut up Kiriko's playstyle under 4 subheadings, being the scout, rush, peel, or to control flanks and angles. Since I've already gone over scouting with the Lijiang Tower example, that leaves us with 3 options. Since controlling flanks and angles is the most important playstyle regardless of what composition you play, I'll cover that first. As you can see, I've broken down the controlling flank section into 3 further parts: dueling, poking, or supporting. Dueling is as simple as it seems. You take an angle, a DPS will likely duel you, and you rely on your mechanics in hitting headshots to win out that duel. You can see an example of this on Watchpoint Gibraltar Attack by the blue box. Poking is also pretty simple. Because your kunais have no fall off as Kiriko, and you have a teleport as an escape, you can literally just hold an angle and spam kunais at the beginning of fights. For example, on Route 66 first point, you could take the high ground, wait for your team to dive, and spam kunais in the meantime from your angle. Be sure to get closer though in the mid fight to get more value out of your kit. Lastly, supporting just means supporting any DPS on an angle. I've already gone through this in prior examples like King's Row, but I will mention more examples in a minute. Now onto rushing and peeling. To help explain both these concepts, I'll use a top-down view of Blizzard World first point attack. Say you're playing a very split comp, being Kiriko, Zen, Sombra, Genji, D.Va. If you want to adapt the rush playstyle, you're gonna need Kitsune Rush. Here, you could teleport to your Zen, drop Kitsune Rush in mid, and push in deep with your Sombra and Genji pinswing from behind. Alternatively, with the peeling playstyle, say your Zen gets hacked by the enemy Sombra, you could teleport to your Zen, drop your protection Suzu, and he lives. Also note the playstyle of controlling flanks also applies here. You could set up top poking from range, you could support your Sombra from afar or teleport to her if she needs help, or you could go in very aggressively, looking to duel the enemy team and teleport straight out. Again, referring to the 3 sub-points of Kiriko controlling flanks and angles. This very example shows why Kiriko is so hard to play and why this guide was so hard to make. You're such a flexible and situational hero that you have so many options to choose from, and each will come down to how each teamfight plays out. Before I end off, I'll briefly touch on positioning, of which there are 4 simple rules taken from Nata OW. The first is to have cover or a corner, which you clearly do in this example. The second is to have line of sight, which you also have both onto your team and onto the enemy team. This is super important in order to keep a high level of awareness, so you can choose one of the many options you have, whether it be peeling, controlling flanks, rushing, etc. The third rule is to have distance from angles. This just means that you have enough distance from flanks that you can react to threats coming onto you like an enemy Genji. The last rule is to have defensive or aggressive rotational options. So a defensive option would be teleporting to your Zen, and an aggressive option would be to teleport to your Sombra or to drop down and duel. Anyways, I really hope this guide explained how many flexible playstyles Kiriko can have in a single team fight thanks to her mobility in teleports. Make sure that if this video helped to raise your IQ, be sure to share it with your friends to also raise theirs. Until next time. This is the best way to play Lucio. Lucio has 3 main playstyles: Reddit, Run It, or Relieve It. In other words, you need to find playstyles to enable your team and to disable the enemy team. The Reddit playstyle looks to duel enemy squishies by their lonesome, disabling the enemy team. The Run It playstyle looks to utilize your speed to enable your own team, and the Relieve It playstyle looks to enable your own DPS on off angles or to disable the enemy flankers. Lucio's primary fire, Soundwave.mp4, makes Lucio shoot green projectiles that deal 20 damage and are shot in a 4-round burst. Lucio receives 5 of these bursts in one clip, hence 20 shots in total, taking just under a second to fire a single burst. There's one main combo where you land 4 headshots, then a boop followed by a melee, and you'll often perform this with momentum just as you come off a wall ride. Even the best Lucios will rarely pull this off to perfection, but aiming for it allows you to enter DPS duels with a burst of damage and speed. I'll develop this a bit more in the playstyle section. Aside from that, Lucio's gun is one in the few instances where even landing a few shots from afar can have a big impact since it can help charge your beat faster, so investing some time into aim training, whether it be in customs or tryhard FFA, is a worthwhile investment. Lucio's first ability, the bisexual beatbox, makes Lucio play one of 2 songs, which either heals your teammate for 16 HPS or provides a speed buff of 25% in a 12 meter radius. I will also group up your amp, which accentuates either songs to do 52 HPS to teammates or a 60% speed boost. So when do you speed and when do you heal? Well, it's pretty simple. If your team are looking to move, either to aggress onto the enemy team or to avoid the enemy team's aggression, stay on speed. Otherwise, you ought to be healing since you can passively gain ult charge whilst your team is stationary.
So you want to hit your power spike with an aggressive amp speed during punch, during turret, and when those are not available, you are playing more passive and more denying their Ryan from capitalizing off of his power spike. Obviously, if you get the opportunity to duel the Widow, that's on the checklist as well, but I think those are our priorities. And the reason why that's important is because half of these priorities we could have scouted in the spawn. Looking at my Ramacha, looking at my Bastion, right? Because like right here, we just walked forward. Man, we really did not need speed here. And right now, you would love to have an amp here. Now, will your Ramacha walk through the Reinhardt and walk into the Widow? Maybe, maybe not. But if he wants to, it's there. And there it is. There's the amp, right?
Building on that Spyro clip, I'll also talk about the amp usage there too. Your amp usage depends on the volume of aggression. So if your team wants to be really aggressive, which in that clip would be if your Ramacha has Nemesis form and really wants to go in, or if your Bastion has turret form and is on a juicy off angle, or if your Symmetra is teleporting in, then you'd likely use your amp. Conversely, if the enemy Reinhardt is nano boosted and speeding onto you, you need to be amping speed away. There's also the debate of whether you speed your core, so your Reinhardt, Ramacha, or Zarya, basically just meaning your single tank, or whether you speed your DPS on off angles. As a general rule of thumb, speed in your tank first, and then when they're in effective range, you can look to diverge and speed onto off angle threats. This can either be by yourself or with another DPS.
Look at your Ramacha. Does this gentleman need speed anymore?
He's on top of them.
Right, so then what do?
Go find something else to do.
You diverge. Right. You've already done your job. Like, your Ramacha is where he wants to be. So then it is not only good, but it is best for you to do what you're doing right now. And then there's some times where you might decide that actually assisting the engage is not as important as dealing with the split. Like, let's say that they've got a Sombra on their comp, you might get your amp speed for like a second of their engage and then turn around and deal with the Sombra because she's prio. This is where you need to be helping these guys. Like, I mean, even if you're playing Lucio, it would be the same exact thing too. Like, this is the thing too, like when you're playing Lucio, this is also what you're looking for. There's more gray area because something like a speed on a Reinhardt might be useful on core, but even then, like, this is probably more important than any of the trash damage that you do in a Doomfist as a Lucio player.
With amp heals, you'll mainly be doing this if multiple teammates are low and running away just isn't an option, like if you're on a Zarya grab for example. Of course, there's using crossfade and amp for yourself, and this would likely be in 1v1 scenarios where you're dueling another support or DPS, where quickly switching songs, using amp, alongside your wall rides and some good strafing can all make the difference to make you a very elusive target to hit. Lastly, keep in mind that your crossfade is also a sphere and not a circle, meaning you can stay on high grounds while still being able to speed or heal, like this high ground on Hollywood first point defense. Lucio's third ability, we do a bit of trolling, makes Lucio fire out a sound wave which boops enemies in an 8 meter range, dealing 25 damage on a 4-second cooldown, consuming no ammo. Referring back to the enable-disable concept, a key usage of your boop will be in some way, shape or form used to disable the enemy team. For example, booping someone off high ground is a form of disabling.
You need to boop them off of high ground off the map, or boop them off from the high ground onto you guys. Because if you boop them off of high ground onto you guys, now they no longer have map control on you. You won't get everybody, but you'll get some of them. And that's enough. And by booping them off of high ground, your team takes less
damage. They have the angles, exactly. You cannot just AFK where you are now and expect to win this fight.
Say you're on Havana first point attack and there's an enemy Sigma playing on the high ground. Booping him off would be huge value, since due to Sigma's low mobility, he can't just fly and take back the high ground unless he invests Flux. It's also using Boop and your own awareness to disable the enemy flankers by messing up their movement and aim, as Spallo explains here.
If you guys are running Brawl, right, and you guys are going in against the enemy team, they might have a Tracer, they might have like a Reaper flank, they might have like a Sombra flank, they might have a Ball going in, right? What you can do is Lucio is, as your team is engaging frontline, your job is to deny these guys. Sombra, Tracer, Reaper, Ball. They're all flankers, but they all have relatively low range damage. So you can deny them by spamming in the direction. They get too close, you boop them away. Your heal aura, you're like the back door. You're like, stay away, stay away, stay away, stay away. Let's say this was like a Widow on a flank or a Kree on a flank. You could either go in and duel them if it was like a Widow, not a Kree. Or you could get guys, they're behind us, let's speed so fast that this off angle gets literally left behind, it's not doing anything.
It's a visual example of Funny Astro from the Philadelphia Fusion doing this against Choice A1 on the Tracer from the Guangzhou Charge. And as you can see, it's quite difficult for him to reach the Fusion's backline. Aside from that, Boop is really just used to enable your own selfish aggression, whether that be to boop someone off the map or to boop someone whilst you're dueling them for added damage. Simultaneously, Boop can also be used to deter flankers, control high ground, boop enemies in or away from your team, and add strain to someone's mechanics. Lucio's passive, Skate 3, makes Lucio wall ride, granting him 30% added speed, and he receives a small speed boost when he detaches from the wall. There is so much to the mechanics of wall riding that I'm just not going to go all into it for the sake of time. Instead, I'll be sticking to the Pareto principle and talking about the two basic wall ride mechanics that will get you the most value. I advise checking out the subreddit r/Lucio rollouts or r/Lucio mains for all the advice, as well as looking up some wall ride specific guides. The first basic thing with wall riding is that the higher you look up whilst wall riding, the further you will travel in a vertical direction, meaning that this is how you can wall ride to high grounds much easier. And secondly, you can stack the small speed boost you receive at the end of a wall ride by wall skimming, which is just wall riding, then quickly jumping off, then immediately jumping back on that wall, then repeating. In terms of the actual usage of wall rides, the biggest one is to attain high grounds and or reach off angles faster. There's this old Jane clip that I used and annotated over way back in my old Lucio guide that I still think holds up pretty well today because of how important map control is, so I'll play the clip.
Because even the Ashe can coach gun up on top of here and then use a dynamite or anything like that, but if she coach guns up there and she's not assisted by her Mercy or something, you can realistically take her, especially in these close range matchups. Not only are you talking about healing, but you need to be able to do what you're doing with your healing, but while doing other things. Providing scouting information. If you're on a vertical sightline, you're definitely going to see way more of what's going on. You're going to be able to see opposing positions. You know, if you just land a couple of left clicks onto the Zenyatta in the backline while you're floating up here, or you need to try desperately to make sure that the opponent is going to be losing as many resources that would otherwise be invested into your poor Reinhardt, as well as making sure that the opponent can't do anything cheeky like shooting past your Reinhardt and getting some like massive dynamite plays or being able to poke or dive anything with the actual diva standing up there. So high ground contest, so you have more options, more lethality choices to, you know, if you do see the Zen gets to half health, you can amp speed, go nuts.
There's also the evasive properties of wall riding, making you quicker and harder to hit, as well as being able to avoid ultimates like Shatter. Lucio's ultimate, the Ajax, makes Lucio give all allies around him 750 temporary overhealth, which decays over 6 seconds. Just to note, there is a small but noticeable half a second grace period where your beat can still apply to an ally if you just move into line of sight after you beat. Thankfully, beat is relatively simple to understand and use, and just like many abilities in Overwatch, beat usage is centered around your own aggression or aggression from the enemy team. It's why against a Grav or Nanoblade, you look to beat defensively because you want to absorb the enemy aggression. Same with Soldier's Overclock, same with Soldier's Visor, Mace Blizzard, Ryan Shatter, Sigma's Flux, and countless other ults in the game. But if you're ult tracking and those aren't up, or if your team is looking to make an aggressive play, that's where aggressive beats can come in. For example, if your Reinhardt wants to run it down mids with speed boost, he very well might need beat to survive and to maintain his own aggression. However, there are times when your beat just can't absorb the enemy team's aggression. For all my Overwatch 1 homies back in 2019, during the GOATS meta, some Lucios just wouldn't beat at all because they'd still get shredded through it. And the same can apply in Overwatch 2. If the enemy team over-ults and use, say, Grav, Bob and Nanoblade, then I'm sorry to say, but your beat is going to do nothing against it. It'd be much more efficient for you to just accept the L of that teamfight and walk in aggressively with speed boost and beat to walk over the enemy team. Now onto the positioning and playstyle section of the guides. Again, for those who are avid watchers of my guides, you'll be aware of the 4 positional rules derived from Contenders coach Zenyatta, but I'm going to remove one of the rules and add one in, as you'll see with this example on Kings or Thirds. First rule is cover, that hasn't changed. If you need to avoid a Widow headshot, a Sojourn railgun, or any big burst of damage, cover is vital to have. Second rule that hasn't changed is lines of sight. This just means being able to see your team and the enemy team, giving you information on what you should do. The third rule, which is the new one that I'm introducing, is the ability to disable or enable. I've already talked about this before, but especially with Lucio, this is your bread and butter. Here, you can disable any flankers from diving high ground, or even diving your backline if they're playing low ground, and you can also enable your tank by dropping down whenever and speeding your tank in when you need to. You can also disable the enemy supports with a bit of Reddit Lucio by diverging from your tank and dueling those squishies. The last rule is rotations. This does play into the third rule and just means that you have the potential to aggressively or defensively move positions when and where required. And now, Lucio's playstyle. This has already been interwoven throughout and mentioned at the beginning with the Reddit, run it or relieve it playstyles. So now the question is, when do I do which playstyle? The key thing here is that most of the time, you'll be fluidly moving between playstyles in a single teamfight, or maybe even doing them at the same time. For example, you might do the run it playstyle first, looking to speed in your team and then looking to diverge and red it onto certain off angles once your team are in range. Or you might be redditing and relieving at the same time by fighting enemy squishies with the help of your own DPS. You might be running it and also relieving it by disabling flankers whilst also speeding your team in. You'll have to use your own judgment to decide which playstyle to do when, which you can already do at spawn by looking at your own composition. Now onto Lucio's backline synergies. Lucio Moira, a bit outdated thanks to Kiriko, but still solid in ranked. Works best on close range maps, and if you and Moira are communicating, you might want to consider staying on speed as much as you can to allow your Moira to charge her coalescence that bit faster. Lucio Zen. All hail our Lord and Saviour No Hill, who tried to make this viable on the LA Valiant when they played this in New Queen Street. Unfortunately, it saw mixed results at best. If you're keen on running this, your amp usage needs to be pitch perfect when enabling your tank, and if they run a tracer, which, let's be honest, they likely will, you need to disable her as much as you can. Otherwise, just go Brig. Speaking of Brig, Lucio Brig. A niche but still solid combo as we've seen with the Jokes meta. Obviously, look to enable your Jungle Queen to get into close range, and then you can consider redditing if and where applicable. Lucio Mercy. This actually works best with dive, since both heroes have mobility and are, in theory, undivable, though thanks to the Guardian Angel nerf, that's still up in the air. This is a bit of a contradictory combo, since you as Lucio want to be speeding people in, whilst your Mercy wants to keep the range. As a result, you, your tank, and maybe one other DPS should be looking to do their own thing, fighting for key areas of the map up close, whilst your Mercy and DPS get value of the attention that you're drawing. Lucio Baptiste, an optimized version of Lucio Moira for brawl comps mostly. Aided by Bap's higher damage and utility, look to flex into the relieve it playstyle when necessary, and of course, enable your Reinhardt with speed. Lucio Kiriko. I always end up saying this with Kiriko, but her duos are so versatile. This works best with any form of brawl comp, whether it be the Winston comp seen in the 2022 playoffs, or with Zarya, Orisa, Reinhardt, etc. Lucio Honor, a more flexible version of Lucio Zen, thanks to Honor's higher sustain and healing outputs. You might need to relieve pressure off your Honor every now and then, you'll likely have to speed in your tank, and you might have to go Reddit mode when the situation calls for it. A balance of all three playstyles. Well, that's it for the video. This is the best way to play Mercy in Overwatch 2. The fundamental reason to why you play Mercy is your damage boost and mobility. Look to enable aggressive teammates, whether that be your tank, DPS or support, and don't just autopilot and pocket a single target. Make sure you look around whilst you're beaming in order to maintain awareness, and whilst you should learn your fundamental techs, don't just spam them off cooldown. Use Valkyrie to enable your team's aggression, don't spam your GA, and utilize cover. Mercy's weapon, the Breakpoint King, makes Mercy either heal 45 healing per second to a single target, which is increased by 50% for teammates under half HP, or it applies a 30% damage boost to a single target up to 15 meters. Your beam, regardless of whether it's healing or damage boost, should be used to assist teammates who are actively aggressing onto the enemy team as much as you can.
Assist active combat as much as you possibly can. That's the simplest way I can put it. Chat, why does he not heal his ball? The important thing is that he's not doing anything right now. He is in the midst of combat. This is who you help. Once this guy's, if the Sigma drops, then you can heal ball. Be like, yo, Hanzo, hang on a second, I'm gonna heal ball. This is the same error you made when you stopped damage boosting your McCree here and went to go back to go res your hog. If this Hanzo dies, it's your fault. If this Hanzo has to back off and the Sigma stays, that's a lot worse.
Aggression is the key thing here. If your soldier, Hanzo, or DPS is on a lethal off angle, they better be receiving that beam unless your tank is critical, and if they're full HP, then obviously that's when you would damage boost. There's obviously the pharmacy stuff too. The reason why you pocket Farah is because she's often in aggressive positions looking to get on top of other squishies. But if your Farah is playing too aggressive, or especially if she's playing too passive, like these positions here on Basan Sanctuary, there's just no point in pocketing her. You're either risking your own life, or you might as well be pocketing somebody else. When pocketing, it's also not uncommon for the majority of Mercy players to lose their awareness and go full autopilots.
Farah's got beam, right? So where should your camera be right now? What's going on over here? Are you walking into Soldier LOS right now, or Torb LOS? Is this Orisa going to javelin you? With Mercy, it's almost can be a little bit of a nauseating, constantly checking what's going on left, what's going on right, where's my team, what's going on here, right? Just general awareness of that kind of stuff. And like right here, could you have saved this Hanzo? I don't think so, but you didn't even know that he was critical, nor did you know that he was there, did you?
No.
That's on you.
Keeping on this point of looking around and maintaining that awareness, here's Mineral explaining how looking around can help you position differently and the consequences of tunnel vision with your beam usage.
Look around a lot more. Like you're looking at your Pharah's way too much. You have to always look back. Where's my Widow? Where's my Widow? Not only for her, but she is your defensive pivot. Widow is sort of also part of your group, and she's going to be somewhere behind you, so she's going to be a pivot for you. Like Ana starts shooting you, a D.Va flies at you, you have to know where the Widow is, because that will determine how far you can move up. Because if you would realize, oh, in this situation, I don't have LOS on the Widow, you would reposition differently.
I could put this in the positional section, but awareness is just so important for your beam and your character as a whole that it doesn't really matter. Linking onto this, there's also damage boosting specific instances or bursts of damage. For instance, damage boosting your Sojourn when she has her one-shot ready, damage boosting your Hanzo during a Storm Arrow, your Reinhardt when he fire strikes, Zen after he charges up his right click fully, Hawk after he hooks, etc. If you're more aware of your surroundings, you'll be able to track and damage boost these instances of burst damage. Mercy's first ability, Crazy Ass Movements, makes Mercy fly towards a targeted ally at 17 meters per second up to a 30 meter range with a cooldown of 2.5 seconds. Her angelic descent also allows her to slowly glide down at 2 meters per second. I'm not gonna lie, there's about a bajillion Mercy techs out there, so just like in my Lucio guide, I'm gonna use the Pareto principle and cover the Mercy techs that give you around 80 to 90% of the value that you'll get on the hero. As for Mercy settings, since your crouch triggers your ability to super jump, you need to have toggle crouch off. As for toggle to GA, I have it on since it relieves a mental load off my mind having to constantly hold GA, and it could allow me to look around a bit more, but I know some Mercy mains like Skiesti has this setting turned off, so do whatever feels more comfortable. I'm going to split these techs into the Guardian Angel techs and the super jump techs. Starting off with the former. Firstly, the slingshot. Easy to do, just jump and hold W to gain momentum after you GA to your targets. Secondly, the sideways GA. Just hold either A or D on your keyboard after you jump, allowing you to strafe either left or right after you GA without having to change where you look. Thirdly, the backwards GA. Guardian Angel, then hold S, then jump to move backwards. This is really useful to do if you're flying to a target who's in more danger than you initially thought, hence you want to quickly move away. Fourthly, the directional GA. Literally just turn your camera anywhere and jump, and your Guardian Angel will automatically change directions. Really versatile and snappy, allowing you to quickly flow and bounce between allies, and is best used in Valkyrie. Now onto the super jumps. Starting off with just the normal super jump. Just crouch as soon as you reach your target to fly high in the air. The more charge your bar has, the higher you'll go up. Note that you can super jump anywhere in between you and your targets. You can also super jump by just looking upwards. Super jumps are mainly used to avoid danger by reaching vertical pieces of cover, just like you're seeing in the backgrounds. Most flankers like Tracer and Sombra lack any vertical mobility to chase you afterwards. Next is the stationary super jump. Really easy to do, just shift then immediately crouch afterwards. The penultimate tech I'll cover is the angled super jump. Press Shift and then S, almost like you're doing a backwards GA. Then look down and jump when you're close to your target. This super jump will allow you to jump to high grounds behind you, whilst also being able to look at what's in front of you, allowing you to maintain that awareness. Lastly, the super jump res. GA to a target, then look up and jump. Just as soon as you look up and jump, that is when you look down and res. Make sure you jump instead of crouch, since you'll otherwise be out of the resurrect range. Bit complicated and took me a few tries to nail down. Now onto the actual usage of your Guardian Angel, and obviously you use it to reach a target to either heal or damage boost them. But there's a lot of nuance with this ability, and I want to start off with when not to use Guardian Angel. A lot of Mercies love to autopilot and GA to anything they see, when in actuality, this puts you in awkward positions and leaves you without GA on cooldown.
All you need to do is walk forward so that your beam doesn't break to here, and then maintain the beam. All you do by traversing this distance is you put yourself at the risk of more damage, and you remove the cooldown that you might need to escape. So if this Lucio turns around and shoots at you, you still have your Guardian Angel. But if you Guardian Angel across here, and then they're all brawling here, you're gonna have to sit there and take it for 2 seconds.
Especially considering the recent Guardian Angel nerf and that extra second on the cooldown, you really need to be focused on while you're flying to a target. Not to mention, using Guardian Angel might also cause tunnel vision as you fly to whatever's in front of you instead of taking the time to look around and assess the situation. It's also the risk associated with when you GA. This refers back to the awareness point brought up earlier, but visually look at the environment around your GA target. Ask yourself, if you fly to them, are you likely to die?
Really don't like this. So you have to, again, value your life way more than anyone else's. You're way more important than a tracer. Even if your tracer dies here, it's fine. You guys can fall back, and you already have staggers, your tracer will be back pretty fast. But if you shift in here and you die, you lose the point.
And lastly, there's the length and shortness of your GA. In other words, you cancel GA to utilize the cover around you and to also look around and maintain that hyper awareness to what is actually going on in the teamfights. Super important for pharmacy.
And they have snipers, so you have to use cover, right? You're gonna reach her. Like, your Pharah can't really go any higher. The skybox on this map is pretty low, so there's no need to go for a shift like this where you go over her head, because now you're completely exposed from this angle from snipers. Maybe a Sombra decloaks here, pokes you a little bit, and then Ash hits you, and then you're dead. So you have to make sure that you don't overexpose yourself. Do shorter shifts and cut them more often.
Mercy's second ability, Samito's arch nemesis V2, makes Mercy bring back an ally to full HP, taking 1.75 seconds to cast, with a 5 meter max range, significantly decreased movement speed, and a very lengthy cooldown of 30 seconds. If Mercy moves 7 meters out of her range from her res target, the res is cancelled. There's obviously quite a bit of tech with your res. I've already covered the super jump res before, which you use to minimize the movement penalty and to make you more evasive, but there's also crouching from high ground to be within res range, or falling off high ground or flying around a corner to get the res off out of line of sight. Note that you don't actually have to maintain LOS with your res target for the entirety of the duration, just for the beginning. Res usage is actually extremely simple. It's all about minimizing the risk involved in going for the res. That's it. To do that, you can ask for things like a defense matrix or a Zarya bubble, or you can go for the resurrect at the last moment of that respawn timer when the enemy team likely have their attention elsewhere. Also ask yourself, are there any enemies around the body of the res? Is the body you're resing also around the corner that can minimize risk? If you're in Valkyrie, since you're more mobile, you may want to go for a res because your increased movement reduces the risk involved. Again, this is why awareness is so vital in Mercy, because looking around your environment can give you the information to assess whether going for a res is relatively safe or not.
So it's always about finding the balance between awareness of my team, awareness of where I am on cover, and awareness of the enemy team. And this is what makes Mercy hard. Like right now, is this safe? It is, but you didn't know that, did you? Check what's going on, then make the decision. Guess what? It's fine. But even just if this Orissa's here, she can't kill you, but she's gonna javelin you and cancel the res, right? So like, just do a check.
Mercy's ultimate, Yas Queen, drastically increases Mercy's movement speed, allowing her beam to chain to targets within a 10 meter range, boosting Mercy's healing per second to 60, and has a 15 second duration. I'll also couple in your pistol too, which does 20 damage per bullet with no fall off, and in Valkyrie, your bullets move twice as fast. I'll begin with an old but gold clip from Neandra way back in my 2021 Mercy guide, talking about how to maximize your beam chain, as well as coupling in a Skiesti clip talking about your Guardian Angel techs you'll mostly be using in Valkyrie.
Remember that the beams created by Valkyrie have a range of only 10 meters, which doesn't cover the entirety of many objectives. Keep track of who your original beam target is so you can min-max the amount of impactful allies hit.
I found that when you're in Valk, you'll mostly want to be using directional guardian angels to move around fast between targets and then use the occasional super jump when needed.
In terms of the actual usage, Valkyrie is a tempo ultimate, meaning that you use this to increase or decrease the pace of a fight. Just like with Coalescence, Valkyrie isn't one of those ultimates you pop and automatically kill 5 within 2 seconds. Rather, Valkyrie can double or triple your effective output, giving your team that edge when they start to push into the enemy team, or vice versa. There's also the Battle Mercy, which I obviously can't forget. Thanks to your increased movement and bullet speed, Mercy can actually duel quite a few heroes up close and win out those encounters, especially snipers. Say you're on Blizzard World's second point defense. At the right time, in the right place, you could look to duel any of their squishies on high ground or low ground. Just keep that awareness if you're going to do this. Now onto Mercy's positioning, playstyle and communication. Beginning with the 4 rules coined by Contenders coach Zenyatta, here's an example on Nabani's second point defense. Here, you have hard cover, always important to minimize damage taken. Secondly, you have great line of sight, allowing you to see who needs help where, giving you the information to assess whether flying to someone is too risky or not. Thirdly, you have great distance from angles. Fortunately, the one angle behind you isn't really accessible by the enemy team, and for any flanker who wants to get on top of you, you'll see them coming. And lastly, rotations. This is kind of a weird one for Mercy, since it depends on where your team is playing, and is mostly linked to the second rule of LOS. Now onto Mercy's playstyle. Honestly, there isn't too much to say here. You're always going to be enabling aggression, especially when your DPS take aggressive off angles, and you're almost always looking to keep the distance due to your low sustain. It's why on maps like Elite and Control Center, I advise not playing in White Room if you're keen on running Mercy. You're just gonna get run over, and you could be getting way more value, pocketing an aggressive DPS on the coast, keeping their distance, referring back to that third rule of positioning. And lastly, communication. There's a few key calls you can make. Firstly, if you're pocketing someone like a Farah or Sojourn, and you decide to leave them for whatever reason, make sure you call that.
Now when you're going for this shift, what do you need to say?
I'm leaving you to Farah.
Now your Farah has absolutely no idea that you just left her. So you either need to do one, tell her you leave her and to tell her that she should please save. They have kill potential right now on your Farah. Or number 2, order her to fall back and kill this Winston.
Next, call when you're doing reses for the same reason prior. There's also more team-oriented calls, like calling whether a fight is winnable or losable, ult tracking and fight planning for your team, and ordering your team to get back or to engage. Now onto Mercy's backline synergies. Mercy Kiriko, a versatile option that leans more on the poke side. Whilst Kiriko doesn't have the raw poke that a Zen or Baptiste has, she does have the mobility to go on cheeky flanks to fight off enemy snipers and then TP back, thanks to the burst damage in her kunais. Mercy Brig. If you're getting dove and still want to play Mercy, this is likely your best option. And that's likely thanks to Brig's repair pack buff and your GA nerf. Whilst Brigitte does cover your sustain issue, there may be gaps in damage or utility that other heroes can fill in. Mercy Ana, a basic duo on paper where Ana focuses on healing the tank as well as looking for cheeky nades whilst you take care of your DPS. Keep eyes on your Ana if she gets pressured, and whilst this is a versatile duo, it doesn't offer the utility a Zen could bring, nor does it have the broad capability of something like a Lucio Ana. Mercy Lucio, both relatively mobile healers who spawned the undiveable dive comp a while back. Just try not to run this with the broad comp, especially with Reinhardt's. Mercy Zen, a brittle glass cannon combo, evident by the low sustain from each hero, but what they lack in sustain, they make up for it in range and utility. Best on long range maps like Junkertown or Circle Royale, and best when paired with Sigma since he doesn't demand much healing. Mercy Moira, kind of a contradictory duo since Moira likes brawly environments whereas you don't. Support your DPS as usual, allowing your Moira to do her own thing, occasionally giving her a helping hand, and maybe even boosting her coalescence. Mercy Baptiste, a safer version of Mercy Zen, with Baptiste losing some range, utility and damage in favour of a higher sustain. Again, relatively versatile, akin to Mercy Ana or Mercy Kiriko. Consider boosting your Baptiste if he's on a juicy off angle using his window. And that's it for the guides. This is the best way to play Moira in Overwatch 2. DPS Moira is a legitimate playstyle if done correctly, since your playstyle heavily depends on the type of composition you're up against and the one that you're playing. If your team doesn't require much healing and you see an isolated squishy who you could pounce on, that is where you can utilise the mobility in your fade as well as your own sustain to go full on DPS Moira. Alternatively, if your composition is suited for it and there isn't an opportunity to 1v1, leverage the insane amount of AoE healing you can do. Moira's primary fire, the Suck and Piss, makes Moira either beam enemies for 50 DPS in a 20 meter range, which also self-heals, dealing 70 HPS in a 15 meter range, also applying a lingering healing effect afterwards. Starting off with a little bit of tech you can do on Moira to regen your heal bar faster. Simply just tap your beam on a target on and off really quickly and you'll charge your bar faster. In terms of your actual usage between damaging or healing, it does link in quite a bit with the playstyle that you choose to adopt. But generally speaking, if your tanks are full HP, you can then look for opportunities to dual DPS and enemy supports. For example, on Icon Ward first point defense, if your tank is full HP and a DPS like an Ashe or a Hanzo decide to coach gun or wall climb up, you can realistically take them by either fading up to the high ground and dueling them, or by tossing a damage orb their way and beaming them from low grounds. If you do decide to fade up, just make sure you're able to drop or back off if need be. A massive thing you need to nail down with Moira is your spray usage and resource management. Hold down the spray if your team really need the healing, and try not to waste half your bar healing a small hitbox DPS flying through the air like a Genji or an Echo. Tap your spray when you need to, and remember that it's a projectile, meaning you need to lead your spray roughly in front of where you think your teammate is going to be strafing. The last thing that should be happening on Moira is you entering a fight with half a bar full of resource. The penultimate note I have is awareness. If you're healing a tank at critical HP, but there's a DPS to your right who needs healing, don't ignore them. At the very least, tap your spray at them and quickly return to healing your tank if they're still under pressure. Lastly, note that your Sock is actually a great deterrent against flankers.
And one thing I'll add is Sombra can hack, and Lucio can maybe mark the Sombra, but Moira, going into Moira can right click and just quickly stop that hack, and that's really useful.
You can utilize the 20 meter range to annoy and deter flankers like Genji, Sombra or Tracer when you need to. Just don't solely focus on doing this since your team might need the healing. Before I move on, thought it'd be a good time to mention that if you want coaching from yours truly, join the Discord down below and you can check out my rates. Moira's first ability, the Spooky Step, increases Moira's movement speed for 0.8 seconds whilst cleansing all status effects and granting invulnerability. First off, really basic but just kinda needs to be said, jump at the end of your fade to conserve momentum. Now, with actually using Moira's fade, my number one piece of advice is actually knowing when to not use it. Fade most of the time should be used as a defensive failsafe to escape danger when you're feeling the heat. And of course, there will be times to use fade for an aggressive play, but there are times where you just fade for no reason. You fade after tanking a Reinhardt Fast Strike, an Ashe Dynamite, or some random spam damage that you really did not need to take in the first place. Think of fade like a get out of jail free card that you can use aggressively on occasion. Speaking of those aggressive use cases, this will likely be when you see an opportunity to pounce on an isolated squishy. I actually recommend walking up to that squishy instead of fading to them, since then you're left without an escape button, but if someone's on high ground and you can reach them with your fade, because your hero is a really strong duelist, you can realistically take them. For example, if you're coming back from spawn on Rook 66 second point defense, if there's a DPS holding high ground, you could fade jump onto that high ground, throw a damage orb, and if you get low, then just drop off the high ground whenever. You might be thinking, well, what if my tank doesn't get any healing? And my answer to that is, your damage is your healing. If a Pocket Ashe is busy shooting you because you're damaging her, she isn't shooting your Reinhardt, meaning that you're actually technically indirectly healing him. Moira's second ability, the Skill Orb, makes Moira throw a Biotic Orb, dealing 200 damage or 300 healing, lasting 7 seconds on an 8 second cooldown. The radiuses are quite small, and the damage and healing per second numbers are basically the same as a Biotic Grasp. 3 quick things before moving on to the orb. Firstly, you can cancel the orb with Fade, which is super useful if you're low HP, in order to squeeze out some extra value. Secondly, I'm sure you've heard this a million times, but please try and use orb before Coalescence. And thirdly, with both your heal and damage orbs, look to bounce your orbs downwards towards the target's feet to deal a smidge more healing or damage. You can see this with the footage in the background, where I did roughly 10 or 15 extra damage because the orb travels a longer distance if you aim it downwards. The biggest qualm with your orb is actually not which orb you should use, but when you should use it. Most obviously, look to toss out your damage orbs in between fights, since when the fight actually begins, your orb will be off cooldown. 3 or 4 years ago, I actually made a video back when I was 15, going through some set damage orb spots where you can bounce your orb off walls, hitting the enemy team from spawn whilst you're in relative safety. In terms of the actual fight, you want to use your orbs with purpose, meaning you want to time it with your team's aggression if you're damage orbing, or you want to time it with the enemy team's aggression if you're heal orbing. Don't just randomly spam it down chokes and then be surprised when you don't have damage orb, but when you actually see an opening.
Yeah, but yeah, now
so
that Ash takes
lazy.
out the
So lazy, so lazy. Look at this. Oh my days. Just walk over here and damage toward this. Look at this. Look at this. Go out there. Like, look right now. Don't you wish you had damage orb right now? You could legitimately try and 2v1 these guys. I'm not even joking. You have Fade, you have damage orb, go 2v1 them.
Now, when you're dueling, what orb do you use? Well, honestly, it depends on the matchup. I think in most cases, if you're fighting someone alone, damage orb is the better call. But if you're dueling someone who's pocketed, I think you should either damage orb and focus their mercy, especially considering the recent GA nerf, or you heal orb for more sustain and just buy time. Keep in mind that if you're in a 1v2, the rest of your team are in a 4v3, so if you can waste as much time as possible in that 1v2, I think it's actually worth heal orbing to keep that trade going. With your heal orb, you'll likely be using this when your team are rushing in, or your team are being rushed on. This is what spawned the Lucio Moira Winston dive comp back in Overwatch 1, because Moiras would stack their heal orb and their spray to make everyone unkillable for a few seconds. Lastly, something niche but might be useful, look to bounce the heal orb vertically in enclosed spaces like in King's Hotel, the place with a mega, and just in small enclosed rooms in general to maximize the orb itself instead of it bouncing away from you. Can be super useful when dueling. Moira's ultimate, Lazy Game Design, is yet another ability that only heals the damages. This time, it's a 30-meter beam, dealing 70 DPS and 140 HPS. Your movement speed is also increased by 50%, alongside a juicy self-heal, and this also lasts 8 seconds. Just like with Mercy's Valkyrie, you're not going to kill 5 with Coalescence in a split second. Instead, you use it to change the tempo of the fight, either to increase it by giving your team a resource advantage, or to slow it down if you're down a player or two. This cannot buy time to give your teammate time to come back, or to give one of your teammates time to make a big play. More simply, you can think of it like an aggressive or defensive Coalescence. An example of the former would be taking a wide angle like this on King Zo, damage orbing and heavily pressuring enemy squishies whilst your frontline pushes in hard. An example of a defensive Coalescence would be heal orbing your Reinhardt and then using Coalescence when he's low HP and getting walked over by a nano boosted Reinhardt with speed boost. I personally like to think of this as like a Walmart Transcendence. In terms of the timing of your Coalescence, look to use it in the mid-fight. This is because there'll be less cooldowns like Sleep Dart, Nade, Zarya Bubbles, and much more that could either outright stop your Coalescence or heavily limit the value that you could get from it. Enemy supports also tend to play closer and more aggressive as the fight goes on, since tanks will be drawing attention, meaning that you can exploit this aggressive positioning as the fight goes on. Now onto Moira's positioning and playstyle. Positioning is often a lot less strict and a lot more fluid with Moira thanks to your high sustain and fade, but the 4 rules of positioning that I use for every hero still apply to you. Let's take this example on King's Third. First rule is cover, super important in order to not have things like your fade forced early. Second rule, line of sight. You want to see and have awareness of both teams. Third rule is distance from angles. Essentially, this means that you want to have some distance to react to flankers like a Tracer or Sombra in order to put some pressure on them. And lastly, and arguably most importantly, you need rotations. This just means that you have the ability to move to different important areas of the map, and thanks to your fade, you can. There's some aggressive options here where you can fade to your left to dual DPS, fade back to retreat, or fade aggressively for a ballsy Coalescence. Just make sure that you time this aggressive DPS Moira playstyle well. Speaking of playstyles, let's touch on that. Fairy Tail, a top 500 Symmetra and Moira player, mentioned to utilise High Ground if you're gonna go for the DPS playstyle, and used a clip of Midtown to show this. Apologies for Twitter compression, making the gameplay a bit grainy, and I haven't got a top-down view of Midtown to show why this is so important, so I'll use Hollywood First Point as an example. Essentially, High Ground just means that you get another angle on the enemy team, meaning you split their attention. What is the enemy Ana supposed to do if she's getting pressured by Moira from behind or to her side, whilst her frontline are also getting pressured? Not to mention, you also cover most of the rules talked about prior. Now, the biggest ever Moira mains make when trying to go for the DPS playstyle is timing and context. If your tank has a good amount of self-sustain, like a Zarya, Hog or Sigma, and if you have another support with a high amount of healing, then that opens up more opportunities for you to DPS. Alternatively, if your tank or your team needs healing, then at the very least, it's probably best to top them up before you go and look for DPS duels. You can go through Fairy Tail's Twitter and see some of his DPS Moira, and notice how every time he goes for this playstyle, it's when his team aren't missing that much HP and are either pushing in with him or they're drawing attention elsewhere. Again, DPS Moira is a valid playstyle, it just requires some nuance and execution. Now onto Moira's backline synergies. Moira Kiriko, the two supports with get out of jail free cards. Honestly, I don't think you can go wrong with Kiriko and any other support at this point. This is more than enough healing and sustain, whilst also having great dual potential, as well as Kiriko making up for your lack of utility. Still though, something like a damage boost might be more valuable on longer ranged maps, and something like speed boost might be more valuable on shorter ranged maps. Moira Brig. On paper, the strongest backline against dive, stupid amounts of sustain, solid raw potential, and Brig can pocket your DPS, which is something you're not great at doing. Moira Zen. Moira makes up for Zen's sustain and lack of healing, and Zen makes up for Moira's lack of utility. Plus, you also get a defensive ultimate. There's legitimately a lot to like about this combo, apart from the fact that it falls apart to a single dive hero. Moira is just not great at peeling, since her spray is a projectile and is blocked by barriers. However, if the enemy team aren't running any dive heroes for some reason, you could actually get away with this greedy backline. Moira Lucio, great raw potential, and allows Moira to play more aggressively as she doesn't need to peel as much. However, this heavily lacks any poke damage, hence you have to be running some kind of composition that wants to eventually get up close, and Kiriko is a better substitute than Moira in most scenarios. Moira Mercy. High healing and on paper enables both the tank and DPS. However, this has close to zero utility as well as weaker ultimates in comparison to the rest of the cast. Not a great duo, you'd be better off running any other support with Mercy, especially against dive or on longer ranged maps. Moira Bap or Moira Ana. I've grouped these two together since they serve a similar purpose. This backline can overcompensate for healing whilst lacking some utility, hence why you typically see Ana Lucio, maybe Bap Lucio, Zen Bap, typically ran in place for Moira. However, Moira does provide that extra bit of sustain and 1v1 capability. Well, that's it for the guide. This is the best way to play Zenyatta in Overwatch 2. Orb your flankers and orb aggression as you normally would, but you need to keep moving and rotating with cover when you or the enemy team are aggressing. Be aware and keep your eyes peeled for flankers because a single shot on a Tracer, Sombra or Genji can put a lot of pressure on them. Be disciplined with your positioning, orb aggression, and always be aware of flank threats. Zen's weapon, the blue balls, make Zen fire his orbs dealing 48 damage per shot at 120 DPS. Zen can also charge up to 5 orbs to release them all into one burst, dealing 240 damage in total, one-shotting any squishy targets. In terms of usage, there's actually quite a lot of nuance with your orbs, particularly your secondary fire. In most cases, you really want to get into the habit of only firing your orb volley when you have at least 4 orbs charged. If you're constantly firing out 1 or 2 orb volleys, you might as well be holding down left click and getting higher DPS. Charge your orbs as you approach a corner, then toss them out, and then quickly duck back into cover. Corner discipline is really important here in order to not take too much damage, but I'll get onto that later. With your primary fire, 2 main things. Firstly, when actually dueling DPS, the best piece of advice is to not panic. Essentially, you need to have good trigger discipline. Don't start tossing your shots all over the place, but rather pace yourself and adjust your crosshair to where you might think the enemy flanker will end up. Remember, 1 or 2 discorded shots will force a deflect, translocate or recall. Secondly, and this ties into your orb, you might want to consider shooting and discording different targets. Generally speaking, of course, you'll typically shoot and discord the same targets, but because of how much value landing 1 or 2 body shots is on a squishy, pressuring backline squishies or landing shots on a DPS taking an angle whilst keeping discord on the enemy tank might be a play to make.
We see something nice and juicy, we hear the tickety tickety tickety, but it just doesn't matter. Now, what you might want to do here is if you want to get really fancy, you're like, well, I want to keep that Ramatra discorded so my Ramatra wins. Okay, so then discord the Ramatra, shoot the bat. Or discord the Ramatra and shoot down here. Where you're like, you're not even trying to kill these guys, but you're just going to keep them out of the way so that your Ramatra can pummel this guy. Now that's really, really advanced, and that's hard to do in the heat of the moment, really fast, but you can see all these micro decisions that you're doing right now. Your discord, who you're shooting, who you're harmoning, and you're doing all of them wrong. So now it's less about us shooting Sigma and more about getting the kills on the back line and surviving the Sigma pressure, then killing the Sigma afterwards. So this is the most important kill right here. Like, this has to happen. Ignore Sigma. We're going in.
Remember this. Target priority comes down to who's the easiest to kill and who's the most dangerous. In that first Barlow example, a Baptiste with the Matrix is both an easy and dangerous target compared to a Ramatra in block. Alternatively, if there's a soldier or Cassidy flanking and they start shooting you or your team, then your target priority switches because they're more dangerous than the Baptiste in the back, as well as being easier to kill. Zen's first ability, the most broken ability in the game, make Zen choose any enemy to receive 25% more damage. If the enemy loses line of sight from Zen for more than 2 seconds, the orb will detach. This was kind of covered before, but really simply, orb targets who are aggressive and orb targets who your team are aggressing on.
This Ashe is hyper aggressive. This Ramatra is super defensive. So who do you think is more likely to die from Discord?
Ashe.
Right, and even if you don't kill her, getting discorded is a, hey, watch out, you know what I'm saying? And this person needs to be, hey, watched out, because if she does it, she's going to kill your team, right? So a discord should be often the person that you're shooting, because that's somebody that you need to be putting your attention onto, otherwise they'll kill you or your team. So right now, let's get that Harmony Orb on either Ramatra or Symmetra, because they're both the most aggressive. Let's get the Discord Orb on the enemy Ashe, because she's the most aggressive.
Now, in Brig Zen, and in terms of the bigger picture, you can use orbs to control any section of the map. Here's the example on Basan Sanctuary that I commonly refer to, where you orb both tracers and control that coast-side area of the map. Don't just orb the enemy tank, especially if they're sitting on point and aren't even aggressing or are being aggressed on in the first place. Zen's second ability does literally no healing, has the same mechanics as the Discord Orb, but deals 30 healing per second on a singular target. The exact same logic that I went through with Discord also applies to your Harmony Orb. Orb aggression. It's better to put Harmony on a teammate who's about to take a lot of aggression, rather than using Harmony on a teammate who's low, but in relative safety. Try and use your orbs to control those flanks and orb your flankers, since 60 or so healing on a Tracer is going to mean a lot more than 60 or so healing on a Reinhardt. Zen's ultimate, Invincible, grants Zen invulnerability, a doubled movement speed, and makes Zen deal 300 healing per second for 6 seconds to anyone who is standing within the radius. First off, really simple, but needs to be said. Please use your orbs before Transcendence, especially if you're looking to go really aggressive on a singular target. If that target doesn't have Discord, they could very well survive. Now onto the usage. The most obvious one is to save Transcendence for defensive ults like Grav, Flux, Dragonblade, etc. Do note that you don't want to just ult because there's a Grav or Flux. Assess the situation, look if anyone's going to need the extra healing to survive, then you can trans. You'd be surprised to see how many Zen players pop trans just because they hear Genji pull blades. There's also going to be moments where you just might need to use trans defensively, even if there are no big scary ultimates like Flux or Grav. If the Reinhardt, Ramatra or Orisa are just a bit too aggressive when they go in, you need to be ready to pop trans. The key to not using translate is anticipation. Your Orisa spear spinning into the backline, or Ramatra walking in with Nemesis form might provoke you to think about using trans. Linking onto that theme of anticipation, there's using your trans against the MP. Before, you'd have to hide against her since you'd be dropped to 50 HP and fully hacked. Now that's no longer the case. However, if you're playing up against a full dive composition, or one that can burst down a singular target very quickly, hiding against EMP isn't a bad idea. Lastly, there's aggressive uses of your Transcendence. This will likely be done when there's no ults you need to save trans for, and you want to buy a 6-second window for your team to push in aggressively. Maybe you're stuck at a choke and need to push through, or maybe that tank needs to be shot down. Your trans can greatly help with that. Now onto the positional section of the guides. This is one of the most important areas with Zen because of how immobile you are. The same rules I had in my Honor guide also apply to you, but even more so because you haven't got any defensive abilities like Nade or Sleep Darts. I'll use this example in Kings or Thirds. First off, you need to have a corner or cover. Because of how large your hitbox is, you need to have cover to where you can stop taking damage at any time whilst you're poking.
Cover. Yep.
I was using this little skinny wall. I don't know why it's doing so.
Oh my gosh, you literally survived because you played cover, and then you got greedy and then left the cover and died for it.
Right.
Secondly, you need to have good line of sight to where you can see both teams. This isn't just so you can do damage and help your team, but also your team can help you. This will also help your awareness because, as I get onto, you can see and deal with flankers like a Tracer flanking through the Mega. Thirdly, you need good distance from angles, just meaning that you need some distance between you and the flanker that's going onto you in order to have enough time to react and land some damage.
I want you to anticipate and deny the enemy dive. So like right now, you're very intense on burning what's happening over here, and I appreciate the Discord and some of the shots, but at some point you need to have that internal timer or that awareness of the enemy
dive tanks or tracer or whatever, this is their window where they're going to be doing something. I remember when Alarm was like in contenders, and one of the things that tracers would always say that made Alarm great wasn't just his mechanics, but he seemed to always know the timing of when that flank was coming. Like he always had that right click ready to the launch, and and he wouldn't always get the kill necessarily, but you'd force the blinks, he'd hit one shot and force the recall early, and it just scuffed things up.
And lastly, you need rotation options. This means that you have places to move throughout the fight in order to keep up with your team and also to pressure the enemy team from different angles. Here's an old but gold example of Jane going through a Master Zen on Rialto, showing a perfect rotation to the left.
Okay, left flank.
Yeah, good, you got it. Is that really that hard? Soft flank, left side, found an opportunity, unscouted, surprised the Hanzo, had a right click charge, boom. Now, you can either look for a follow-up, try and deny the res, or just fuck off. You need to do that shit consistently. You want to get to the point where the opponent is fearful of what window, doorway, crevice, just fucking attic your robot ass is going to float out of and just delete somebody with a right click.
The key thing with rotations is the timing. You want to be timing when you move with when your team, specifically your tank, is drawing attention. That can be your Reinhardt pushing in, Orisa spear spinning in, Winston jumping, ball rolling, or Doom punching in.
Now, Sigma can beat the absolute living crap out of Zenyatta. However, he's timing this at a point in time where Space has committed shield and is distracted on an off angle. At the same time, he takes this position here. This is a window of opportunity to watch Space's HP. Bang, 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 bang. Space has to give up space. Get it? And there's no risk from Finn, or very little risk from Finn at that point in time.
It's why, in that Jane clip, that flank worked, because the Zen's Reinhardt was drawing attention away from the front line. And before I end off the section, there's been a solid pretense throughout the video when playing Zen against flankers. But what if you're not playing against any flankers at all? Here's Barlow explaining just how aggressive you can be when you're playing up against a brawl composition with limited mobility and range.
Team Blue doesn't have any mobile dive threats that would punish their supports for being isolated, so it's actually very safe for Ana Zen to be isolated versus Team Blue's composition if they're with a flanker. I would like Luke to be rotating all far here with ball and holding this angle here, maybe even like back here, right? To where it's a lot, yes, there's a little bit of isolation, but nothing on Team Blue is able to punish that isolation fast enough.
Now onto Zen's backline synergies. Zen Kiriko, honestly, quite underrated. Kiriko can flank and TP back to you if you need peeling, whilst also having enough healing to take care of your only tank. If both players are competent and you play some distance, there shouldn't be too much to dislike here. Zen Lucio. Run by Coach No-Hill on the LA Valiant last year, Zen Lucio's lack of healing is, in theory, made up for it by their utility. 2 defensive ultimates, speed and discord, as well as respectable damage. Move fluidly with your Lucio so he's able to peel flankers off you, though you may have a hard time healing your tank as well as dealing with a coordinated dive. Also, don't stack your trans with beats. Zen Moira. On paper, a good combo. They both make up for areas they lack in, with that being utility on Moira's end and that being sustain on Zen's end. But because Moira is one of the worst pure supports in the game, a single dive hero can tear apart a composition built on Moira Zen. Zen Bap or Zen Mercy, comboing these two together because they're both glass cannons of a support duo and are mainly played on the same long range maps, Soccer Real or Junkertown. Great poke and utility, just look to keep the distance on maps where you typically wouldn't play this, especially up against Orisa, Ryan and Ramattra, who will run you over if you get too close. Zen Brig. Where Zen Brig lacks in range compared to Zen Mercy or Zen Bap, it makes up for it in sustain. Brig's repair pack buff makes her the ultimate pure support, just ensure both of you rotate together. Always watch and look out for flankers. Zen Ana, kind of like a more rounded out version of Zen Bap or Zen Mercy. Nade, Sleep and Discord are powerful pieces of utility, so make sure, especially when you're not up against dive comps, you're utilising angles to get the most out of your abilities. Well, that's it for the video.